You are at a party somewhere far from home, and people ask where you are from. Before you even say the word, your hand goes up, palm open, fingers together, and you point to a spot somewhere near the middle of your left hand. No map needed, no explanation. Most people would just name their state. But if you grew up in Michigan, your body answers the question before your mouth does. And that little moment tells you everything about the people who come from there. Michigan is one of the only places in the country where people carry a built-in map of home on their body. That hand thing is not just a fun party trick. It is a signal of something psychologists would call deep place-based identity, the kind that does not sit quietly in the background, but actively shapes how someone sees themselves and everyone around them. And it starts with something most people overlook. Michigan is a peninsula, two of them actually, which means that unlike most other states, you do not accidentally pass through it on the way to somewhere else. You go to Michigan on purpose, or you do not go at all. That physical separation does something to the people who grow up there. When the land around you is bordered by water on nearly every side, it creates a kind of psychological boundary too. Michiganders grow up in a world that feels self-contained. The lakes are not just scenery, they are soft walls. Friendly ones, but walls all the same. This might seem unusual from the outside, but it makes more sense when you understand the isolation factor. People do not drive through Michigan the way they drive through Ohio or Indiana. There are no major cross-country highways funneling strangers through on the way to somewhere more famous. If someone is in Michigan, they chose to be there. And that changes things psychologically. When your home is not a waypoint but a destination, you start to see it differently. You become protective of it. You become proud of it in a way that people from pass-through states rarely feel. There is a phrase people in the Midwest use a lot, Midwest nice. And in most states, that phrase gets complicated fast. But in Michigan, it carries its own specific flavor. People there tend to be genuinely warm, but not in the way you might expect if you have spent time in the South, where politeness often comes wrapped in layers you need to carefully peel back. Michiganders are more direct. If they like you, you will know it. If they do not, you will probably know that too, but through a polite silence rather than a confrontation. Someone who moved to Michigan from North Carolina once described it perfectly. They said people on the East Coast wear their hearts on their sleeves. In Michigan, people believe that being nice just means being nice. No mask. What you see is what you get. There is even a word that captures this entire social philosophy. Ope, a tiny, almost involuntary sound that slips out when a Michigander bumps into you in a grocery store aisle or accidentally reaches for the same door handle. It is not quite sorry. It is not quite an excuse. It is something smaller and somehow more honest than both of those things combined. A psychologist might call it a low-cost social repair signal, a way of acknowledging someone else's space without turning it into a whole event. But in Michigan, nobody thinks about it that way. It just happens. It is part of the social wiring. Quick, warm, and gone before you even notice it was there in the first place. But here is where Michigan gets more psychologically layered. That warmth has a boundary. People there are friendly, but real friendship takes time. Several people who moved to the state from other places have described the exact same pattern. Everyone is polite from the first day, but it can take months, sometimes even years, before someone truly lets you into their inner circle. It is like careful loyalty. Michiganders don't hand out closeness easily because when they do, they mean it completely. Once you are in for life. They will plow your driveway during a snowstorm without being asked. They will show up at your door with food when things get tough. But that kind of access is earned over time, never just given away freely. And part of that earned trust comes from shared experience. Michigan has weather that tests you. It is not like hurricanes or tornadoes, but in the slow, grinding way of winters that arrive in November and refuse to leave until April. Gray skies for weeks, snow that does not melt, cold that settles into your bones and stays. When you grow up with that rhythm year after year, something changes inside you. You develop a tolerance for discomfort that becomes part of who you are. It is like a quiet endurance you barely notice anymore. The kind that lets you stand in a long line without flinching or sit through an uncomfortable conversation without running away from it. This resilience shows up in how Michiganders approach work, relationships, and the decisions they make every day. The state was built on industries that demanded physical and emotional stamina, and that thing seeped into the culture over generations. People there tend to finish what they start. They show up even when it is not convenient. They keep going not because they are fearless, but because quitting simply does not feel like an option. A Michigander's relationship with hard work is not about hustle culture or ambition in the way coastal cities might define it. It is more personal than that. It is a kind of handshake with yourself. A quiet internal agreement that says, I will see this through because that is who I am. And that agreement gets passed down through families, through neighborhoods. There is also a creative streak in Michigan that often surprises people who have never spent real time there. The state has always been a maker culture. From the assembly lines that reshape modern industry to the recording studios that reshape modern music, Michigan produces people who build things with their hands and their ideas. That maker instinct lives in the craft kitchens of Grand Rapids, the independent restaurants of Detroit that refuse to be anything other than what they are, the local businesses that Michiganders fiercely support over national chains. This is a place where people do not just consume culture, they create it, often quietly, often without expecting anyone outside the state to notice or care. And that is one of the best things about the Michigan mindset. People from outside the state tend to associate it with only a handful of images, and most of those images are negative. But inside the state, the reality is so much broader, so much richer than the headlines have ever suggested. This gap between perception and reality creates what you might call a bad identity. Michiganders know their home is special, but they also know the rest of the country does not always see it that way. And instead of spending energy trying to convince people, they tend to just keep living their lives and loving where they are from. Michigan is also a place of surprising inner contrasts. Someone from Detroit carries a very different energy than someone from the Upper Peninsula. The person who grew up in Traverse City probably does not see the world the same way as someone raised in Grand Rapids. Each region has its own personality, its own unwritten rules, its own pace of life. And yet, despite those differences, there is a thread that connects all of them. A shared understanding that living in Michigan means dealing with things other states never think about, and choosing to love the place anyway. That thread is thin sometimes, but it never really breaks. It is what makes a Yooper and a Detroiter nod at each other with quiet respect, even though their daily lives look nothing alike. That shared defiance shows up most clearly in one of the oldest and most passionate rivalries in American state culture. Michigan and Ohio have been locked in a mutual side-eye for nearly 2 centuries. And while the roots of it are historical, the feeling is deeply personal and surprisingly unifying. Ask a Michigander about Ohio, and you will get a reaction somewhere between genuine amusement and something that almost looks like love for the argument itself. It is one of those rare things that brings the entire state together, regardless of region, background, or belief system. If nothing else can unite Michiganders, Ohio absolutely will, every single time. But beneath the jokes and the bumper stickers, there is something more revealing happening. The way Michiganders define themselves against Ohio is really the way they talk about identity itself. Knowing who you are partly through knowing who you are, not a classic psychological move. And Michigan does it with a joyful consistency that says more about confidence than rivalry. Because people who are truly unsure of their identity do not joke about it. They guard it. Michiganders can laugh about the whole thing because their sense of self is not fragile. It is rooted in something deeper than competition. It is rooted in lakes and long winters, and the sound of ope in a crowded store, and the feeling of pointing to a spot on your own hand and knowing exactly who you are. There is one more thing about Michigan that shapes its people in ways they might not even fully realize. It's the water. Not just as a feature of the land, but as a psychological presence that, in the background of daily life. Growing up somewhere you are never more than a short drive from a lake does something to your nervous system over time. It creates a kind of emotional baseline that outsiders sometimes mistake for slowness. But it is not slowness. It is steadiness. Michiganders tend to be the people in the room who do not panic first, the ones who wait, read the situation, and then act. Some of that comes from the winters, some of it comes from the work ethic, but a lot of it comes from growing up with water always nearby, always moving, always quietly reminding you that things flow whether you rush them or not. And maybe that is the real key to understanding the people who grew up in Michigan. Their identity is not built on what they achieve or how the world sees them. It is built on where they are from. And that where is not just a dot on a map, it is a temperature, a sound, a shape you can trace on your own hand without even thinking about it. In a country where so many people spend their lives searching for a sense of belonging, Michiganders already have one. They have had it since the first time someone asked where they were from, and they raised their hand, pointed to the mitten, and smiled like they were letting you in on the best-kept secret in America. If you grew up in Michigan or know someone who did, drop a comment and tell me which part of this felt the truest. And if you want to see more videos like this, exploring the hidden psychology behind the places that shape us, make sure to subscribe and hit that bell so you don't miss the next one.